Yeah.
Okay.
It's level that. But you don't have to wait for it. Is it recording?
I think so. That little red dot's blinking right there.
You are sad. I'm sorry. I can't figure out how to put my people.
I mean, we've seen them pop up. We know there's
Okay.
4 of them. We're good for
Alright.
now.
Alrighty.
Alright.
Angel, like you. I'll see you.
Bye.
Okay. Where Maya go?
She's going to the restroom.
Okay.
Can you tell me what's on?
Oh, yeah, you can see them. You can see that.
I'm going to call Brittany real quick.
Okay. Just a few seconds, guys. We'll start in a second.
Actually, I'm here to be a rebel raptor.
Okay, so I want to go ahead and start. I want to go ahead and go home. All right. So as I mentioned, this is going to be like really laid back. If you guys ever want to talk, just chime in. I'm going to sit down and drink it up this next. Okay, wonderful. But we're going to slowly go through these slides, not too slowly. And at the end, there is an exit form. But, okay, maybe I should make sure this works. Okay. So first we have our expectations. Can you guys hear me if I'm back here? Yeah? No? Someone?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So first is to be fully present. So if you guys are just doing a lot of extra stuff, try to cut it out a little bit and just pay attention to what we're doing. At the end, I'm hoping that everyone's able to share one thing that they hope to do in their classroom as a response to this session. And then also, please be vocal. I don't want to talk the whole time, but also expect non-closure. Anyone you should add? Oh, the videos are up.
Woo!
How'd that happen?
I don't know.
Okay. We go to the next one.
All right.
Fully present also means turn your video on because we want to look at your beautiful faces. Thanks, Brittany. Oh, looking handsome, Nathan. All right, other two. Okay, you can keep going.
Okay, so for this session, we're going to start by looking at the opening of the book, or more so just defining the words that are used. And then we're just going to go through chapter by chapter. And then we're going to talk if anyone has anything else to say, and then what we want to see in session 2, and then our exit ticket, which is a Google form.
Okay.
All right, so I don't know if it's cut off or not inside. All right, so the terminology of the book, like reading the cover of the book, it's like for white people who teach in the hood, but then when you're actually reading the book, he explains that it's not just white people, it's anyone who works in the school district or works in the hood, and maintains a system that doesn't serve the needs of the students who live there. And then it talks about what is the hood. It's a place where dysfunction is prevalent. This can be urban or rural, no matter where we are. So it's relevant to all of us, whether we're in the Delta or here in Jackson or in Holmes County, which is in between. And then why culturally relevant pedagogy is because it addresses cultural differences between teachers and the students. And I kind of wanted to pose a question first. So why do you guys think cultural relevant pedagogy is important for Teach for America teachers? Like, why is it important that we look at that? Anybody?
Some of us come all the way from California and decided to teach in the Deep South.
Yeah, so we come from a lot of different places, and it's important that we understand where we are. Our culture is different, even if we grew up here, we grew up pretty different than some of the kids around us. No one's all the same.
I definitely loved I never really thought of it as like classroom colonialism. So that really stuck out in my brain. And full disclosure, I have only read the first chapter, but that really stuck out to me. And I want to kind of like break that cycle for sure, because I definitely like see that like going against their culture and the strictness and the misunderstanding really present in my classroom.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And thanks for being so honest about where you are in the book. That's why I kind of have the slides the way I do, just because I know if I was on the other end, the receiving end this time, I know personally I haven't always read or done the assignments beforehand. So So I tried to structure this in a way for us who had other things to do because we are teachers and also humans with real lives. Is there a way for us to kind of minimize the video part but keep them there so we can read it?
Maybe like those little line things, but I don't think you can keep them. Oh, he can move it.
Oh, that's cool. That works. I don't know. Yeah, let's try it there. Yeah, that's fine.
Perfect.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay. So, as Brittany mentioned, chapter 1 talks a lot about like classroom colonialism and just kind of the differences between standards between a teacher and the student. And one example from the book is that he talks about there was a girl, I believe it was high school if I remember correctly, and the teacher felt that she was always tardy to class and was never prepared. But the student was like, I am always there on time. She's like, I'm always at the door when the bell rings. The teacher's like, but you're not in your seat. So the teacher was like, you're tardy. The student was like, no, I'm not. And then also being prepared, the teacher mentioned that the student never has her books or her materials for class. And the student shares her textbook with a different student. So she's like, I do have my books and my materials because I share with someone else. So it's like the lack of conversation between the two kind of threw off their standards, showed the difference of the standards, but also left the student at a disadvantage because of the strictness or the classroom colonialism that was taking place. Would anyone like to read what reality pedagogy is?
Focus on making local experiences visible and makes the students and teacher switch roles. The student gets to tell how to teach something and reveals how traditional teaching processes have hurt the kids. In this pedagogy, all kids are perceived as having a distinct perspective.
And then at the bottom of every slide for each chapter, there's going to be a question, sometimes more than one, and I'm gonna wait every time till someone shares responses to them. So for this one, it says, how can we be culturally responsive and academically progressive at the same time in our classes? So how can we acknowledge the difference of standards between ourselves and our students, but also moving forward with our academics?
So when I was reading the book, this was my big question and sort of my big beef with the book is I only made it up till chapter 6.5, so I didn't get to 7. But in it, I don't remember what the author's background was, whether he was ELA, history, elementary, high school math. I
honestly don't know what he taught either. I know at one point he was a professor.
Yeah, but when he was going through the co-teaching chapter, I remember just saying like as a math teacher, just like, no, like if kids don't know that topic in math, there's no way I can have a kid lead the class on that topic because we don't know the topic yet. And I can picture where in history or English or something where it flows more together, that's easier to pull off. So this was definitely the question that I had on my mind and that I was struggling with in the book. Because for me, if I were to try to implement this in my class, it would just be very difficult, and I'm not sure how it would even be possible in a math class.
That's something I'm actually bringing up on one of the slides later because I'm a math teacher and I was like, how can we be culturally responsive, especially in STEM? It's, like you mentioned, in history, I could probably pull things that are culturally relevant to you.
Yeah.
Or with reading, we can do things that you may be interesting for you, but with math and science, topic is the topic.
Right, because you could be like, share this article or, we pop reading whatever, this article that we want to do in history, but in math, I can't say, solve this quadratic and teach other kids how to solve the quadratics if we don't know how to do that yet.
So I'm going to kind of just throw his question back at you guys. So how do you guys think we can include students' backgrounds, their cultures in STEM part of our classes, the science, the math?
One thing that I kind of learned from another teacher is that if we're working with numbers, the kids are definitely focused on money because it's something that it's a hot commodity. I mean, it's a hot commodity to everyone, but they know how to work with money, right? And so if you turn a math problem into a money problem, they get it a lot quicker. And that's just something I noticed. So if I'm doing an equation or doing percentages, I try and transfer it to money terms. And that was another teacher telling me hey, just translate it to money and they'll totally understand it.
I teach kindergarten, and we're starting with the basis of adding and subtracting, and a lot of them were struggling with that. So I set up a bank account before we got out for Thanksgiving break. And when I say those kids can add like 10, 5, 15, 10, I know one instance, on Fridays, I'll set up the store. Like one table is $2 and $3 stuff, $5, $10, 15. So for some reason, they kept picking up stuff that without really paying attention to the price. So I would make them go work it out. So one of my students said, "Oh, okay, so I had $10 and $5, 15, and I had $5. So maybe I can get this and get that." I was like, "What?" But she was struggling with adding and subtracting. So that's what they know. That's what they understand. They like money.
I think one of the things that I'm thinking about, just to not to move completely away from the STEM category, and if people want to continue to chime in on that, they can. But I'm interested to see what you all think about. There's a part of the book where they were talking about even just like language and the differences in language, and how often if the language is not of I guess the dominant culture, then it's always perceived as wrong. And I'm wondering, is there a way that we can still support our students in the way that they communicate, and making them feel valid for how they, their own culture, and including how they communicate, but also making sure that they have the tools that they need in order to pass these tests, which are always reflective of the dominant culture? What do you all think about that?
Well, I can say I teach science, but I do like learning strategies for math in middle school. And one of the things that we've done lately is I will have a kid go to the board and have someone to explain to them how to work the problem. And as they're going through it, giving them a chance to use their own explanation, and maybe even, kind of throw in those words like, oh, it's not, make sure that when we are speaking, use our terms that we use, and kind of throw some of those things in there. So that way they actually get the opportunity, one, to speak to their peers and be able to explain it their own way, but then you're actually kind of throwing in, exactly what they're going to need for those texts and those words, those terms that they'll need too. We can go to the next one.
All right.
All right, so for chapter 2, the author talked about like coming in beginning of the year, and that how a lot of teachers who work in urban areas are always told to focus on classroom management, while suburban teachers are kind of always hired on like their actual ability to teach. So just the difference of who's hired when, and also being told not to smile until November. So come in basically as someone who's really hard, and you're not fun, you're really strict. And I know, like, for me coming in my first year, and even this year, we were talking to new teachers, and I can even say, like, myself, I told someone, no, you have to come in, like, a little crazy. Like, they have to know that you're very serious about this. Like, they can't get away with stuff. But some teachers take it, I feel, very literal and try not to smile until November, or try not to make too many connections and not be too familiar with students. And he uses what's called fear-based narratives in the book, which are saying, for example, we have examples of students that are their negative backgrounds, the parts that come from them, and teachers look at them and they're like, no, they can't do that because of this. Or maybe if this happens in my classroom, like I can't use a beaker because they might get to fighting with it. Things like that. And he says that fear-based narratives are shaping the way we're teaching in our classrooms. And I was wondering if anyone wanted to share if a fear-based narrative has ever helped, like, kind of shape the way they've taught or seen someone else teach before, and just kind of talk about fear-based narratives and how it affects us in the teaching field.
I could share a story. Can
Sure.
you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
So I have whiteboards in my classroom, and they have these little like square erasers. And the first day that I got to use like the set of the whiteboards, I handed out all the erasers. I have like 25, and like 10 minutes later, the students were just like throwing them at each other's heads. And so I haven't handed out the erasers since then, and they still ask me for them, but I don't know what to do to like, I've told them that they can't throw them, but I think that that's kind of, it kind of goes with the example in the book of how the teacher was scared that they were going to use the glass as weapons.
Yeah.
I've often noted that in my experience, the teachers that come in with the, I don't smile until November, put on this really tough exterior, do so at the price of what TSA calls access usually. Those are the teachers that they have, you pop into their room or you look through their window, the students are at their desks, they are seated, they are, are they actually doing something? Are they being constructive? I don't know. I don't think they're reaching that level of creativity that's necessary to learn. For me, the way I found a balance in that is that I'm just serious about content. On the first day I lay out, this is where I did my undergrad at. This is where I did my master's at. This is what I'm going to do for you by the time. This is your end of course expectation you can have for me. And I just throw content at them. And I developed a reputation at the school for being someone that's like, no, every second in this room we are putting to use. And I back it up like, look, I'm not assigning homework. Because I don't want to read it, but also because they wouldn't do it. And I don't have the time to track down all 150 of them and be like, why aren't you doing this, thing? And it ends up becoming like a flat tire in the grade book for them as they just continually, they'll do the work in class, but they won't do it at home. And we can probably imagine tons of scenarios why that's the case. And so for me, it's like, okay, I got you for this 100 minutes. Because at my school, we have 100-minute blocks. It's like, okay, we are working this entire time. Yeah, I know. I have us reading, Act 2 of Macbeth today, as well as going over this informational article, and we're watching a video. Just like, if anything, if you're lost, just sit there and be a participant, and I can come back and help you. To them, that creates a certain stoicism that I think is somewhat necessary. But yeah, I'm laughing, I'm cracking jokes with them, and, on day one and stuff. Because then it's like, for some students, I found that you need to kind of have a vice grip on them. But that's the thing. It's like, but hopefully in those classes you have like less than 50, the counselors will know, and they'll put you in there with just 15 of them who need that. And that was me last year. And it's like, yeah, I'm not going to have the most successful lesson, quote unquote, but that's okay because I'm going to get at least these 6 or 7 of them through it. And then as I continue going on, it will start developing and moving into, and it'll develop that culture without the need of, threats and intimidation.
Yeah, and I completely agree that, at least for me, in my experience, it starts with being so heavy academic focus, and then I sort of let personality bleed through at certain points to form that connection. Like, I had a real tough time with this chapter in particular because it seems to me the author's like, okay, come at your students first and build a relationship, and then the teaching stuff comes on it. Whereas maybe it's just me, but that's never I don't know how to do that. So
I felt the same. I was like, yeah, I could come in like, hey, let's build bonds. But if I don't come in with some sort of structure, I think my class is going to go completely crazy. And I'm going to be in November like,
right.
Oh, we can't walk down the hallway quietly.
Right. And I think for me, like the way I introduced small group activities this year, I was like, okay, this is what we're going to be doing. Small groups. First time we ever done it. Okay, I don't want to see calculators flying through the air like this. And I'll like throw it across the room. I don't want to see erase markers flying through the air like this. I'll throw it across the room. And it's like, and like, I don't know, I rely on a lot on personality and sort of like pointing stuff out in the room. So then like, it's kind of almost a theatrical performance, and kids are like, okay. But then that like also gets the point across that like, okay, like he's seen it before. He knows like what could happen. Like, let's not do it because obviously we're not going to get a reaction from him. And I don't know, I just think that like if you approach it in a fun and jokey way, kids can kind of like, okay, like.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that it's often either one of two things. Like you said, it's either that they get a rise out of it and they want to get a reaction out of you or a reaction from the class. And then when you kind of, take that fun away because like you're exposing them like, oh, I've seen this before. It's not really that wild and crazy. I'm not going to be shocked when you do it. It kind of is like a down, like they're kind of like let down after that and then they won't do it. And then there's another set of kids that's also like they genuinely don't know how to interact with certain things, so like I was thinking about my example of my first year teaching. I didn't do labs at all, and I taught 6th, 7th, and 8th grade science. I had the most boring science class my first year as far as like labs went, and my fear was mostly about the glass and stuff like that, and like gases and like all these other, my materials are expensive as hell, and I feel like they were gonna, just abuse them. But what I ended up finding out too late in the game was that most of my my kids just didn't know how to interact with those materials. So I literally had to teach them. And I feel like us as teachers, we often forget that sometimes you have to teach a child how to study, how to read, you know, take notes, how to manipulate, you know, a certain object, you know, and we just assume that because we come from a place that taught us how to do these things, that the kids know it too, and it's not necessarily that. So yeah.
We're gonna go ahead and go to the next slide for the sake of time. All right, so chapter 3 talks about church and its relation or parallel to the classroom. Would someone be interested in reading what Pentecostal pedagogy is?
Pentecostal pedagogy and the similar like church brings the urban educator to church or brings the church to the urban educator. It requires being a student of the ways the pastor and congregants conduct a highly charged exchange, and not necessarily of the faith or religious practice of the church members. Requires the educator to study the context of the gathering and the effects of the context on those that gather in that space.
So I'm not sure how many of us have been to a Black church, but I know like I personally have, and in church, I hear a lot of call and responses, how you may do in class. So can I get an amen? And like everyone's required to respond. And sometimes pastor will say it several times to get everyone's attention. I know I see myself doing that in class a lot. But also the author talks about how when the pastor walks in, he demands the attention. He waits till things quiet down if things are rowdy, or he waits for the call and response that he's looking for. And just seeing the similarities between the Black church and the classroom. But he also relates it to a family within this chapter. So seeing a classroom as a family. And I was wondering, do you guys think a classroom structure should be similar to a family structure?
I think I really liked this section, especially when it came in like relating it to family, because I know a lot of like my experience in the Black church was often rooted in like my educational background, because so many people that went to my school ended up going to my church. So it was a lot like intermingling between the two, but seeing that there's a family context to it, I think really brightened my eyes to what a classroom should feel like in terms of like warmth and the whole idea of like not smiling until November. Like I can't not smile if I'm going to have a family kind of vibe to my classroom. But the fact that there's this melding of ideas and people in one building or room with the same kind of, I guess you could say, church message or idea during classroom, I think is really cool. But the idea that there's a family, there's like a head of the classroom, which is ideally the teacher, which is something I'm still thinking about. But I love the idea that there's like a family warmth to the classroom in terms of the Pentecostal pedagogy that he was running through.
I know for my classroom personally, I feel like it's really ran like a family. I even have a student, so I have 2 classes. One class I moved up with from last year. I was 2nd grade, now I'm 3rd grade. But my 2nd class, I'm completely new to all of them. And a student from that class was like, Miss Singleton doesn't act like our teacher, she acts like our mom. And it just made me laugh, but it also reminded me how much I do run things like a family in my class. We have a very warm feeling. So my first class more so because I had them last year, but even in my 2nd class. And I enjoy it, but does anyone here teach higher grades, and how does that work with kids who aren't so young?
So I handle every single grade, freshmen, sophomores, juniors, seniors in high school. And I think, again, it goes back to sort of this idea of like performing and putting on a performance through like a teacher personality. Is like after Thanksgiving break, all my like girls came back with new hair. And then like, you know, if a girl was acting out in class, I'd be like, oh, just because she got new hair now, she's just up acting like she's grown. They'll just like sort of be like, what? And then just sort of, you know, go back on, because it's just so far out of left field. But then like, I don't know, I'll comment on things like situations like that in that way. And then it's kind of like, I don't know, like he actually does like notice things other than just, you know, equations. And I'll kind of, like my character in the classroom is kind of like, look, I'm just like a white guy professor type who thinks he's teaching college, and I'm very boring. And then I'll just let moments like that shine through, and it's kind of like, oh no, that's unexpected, that's weird.
I know the problem I would have is like the other day, we're talking about bringing in the church components, though, I mean, most of my students are not church goers at all. I mean, I made a statement about the Holy Trinity the other day, and I might as well have been referring to Buddhism, you know, and I had to explain, well, this is the Holy Trinity, and of course here I am as, you know, gay agnostic explaining religion to a group of people in my classroom. I'm like, there's something, this is something in Mississippi that's forcing me to teach, you know. You know, I'm like, whatever. I mean, you know, which is fine because, of course, the texts that I'm choosing are, of course, rich in religious understanding and ideology. But for me, I mean, if I tried to, I think, do that, it would come across as, you know, something artificial. And I found out very quickly in teaching that, you know, any sort of artificial whatever is, you know, putting on any sort of pretense of an authentic sense of self, that takes away from the academic growth, takes away from access, because the students know that you're lying through something, or they know they can sense that shift in a lack of confidence. You know, and I don't know if, you know, and I do disagree with the author in this, particularly in this chapter. It's just like, I just don't feel like it's my place to go in there and try to assume a family role. Whereas for me, it's like, I'm like, you know, I've had to help a lot of these students and I've had structural problems with some of them where they don't understand what my role is or how to identify me with, you know, from, you know, am I a friend? Am I, you know, and I've kind of come up with this idea that I'm like this, you know, this distant uncle that comes into town so often, and that's how they need to view me. Because, you know, I don't, you know, I had a problem with, you know, these female students that could try to put their hands on me, and I was like, no, you can't do that. So, yeah, you know, and I had to teach them, as Don was saying, you know, earlier, some of these things we take for granted, like how do you operate in a public space? And I feel that if I were to come in, as the author was suggesting, as this, you know, wannabe Pentecostal preacher in some respects, I would continually blur those lines and continue to add to identity issues, which could then later develop into serious issues, especially with law enforcement and other things that could carry on beyond the classroom and how to deal with people in public.
And I think that's not to say that, you know, certain teachers can't come at students head on at the beginning of the year and, you know, assume that role immediately. But for me, I just can't, and therefore I have to rely on like personality and almost performance in the classroom.
I think the way you described it does still reflect a family structure, just because you literally took the words out of my mouth when you were saying, like, you didn't take the words out of my mouth. You were basically saying what I was thinking, as far as like there's different roles within a family, right? So the distant uncle, that's still a role, and the distant uncle still comes with a valuable lesson, and maybe the distant uncle's role is to, like, you know, when the distant uncle comes around, they are like the, you know, stress reliever, because they get to do something exciting and fun, or just a new face. You know what I'm saying? So like, I was thinking about, I have my former students over my house this weekend. 3 of them just turned 18, which is crazy to me. And they, so we celebrated at my house. One of the other ones was 17. But we celebrated at my house, and I was just reflecting on how our relationship has changed, because I taught them for the first time when they were in 8th grade.
Oh, wow.
And now that they're 18, I'm no longer this, like in 8th grade, I assumed that role of like the parent, how Capricia said. I was always the mom. I was on them. I was making sure their homework was done. But now they were at my house, and I honestly didn't spend more than like 45 minutes with them a day. You know, like they were doing their own thing. And if they needed me, they would come to me, you know, so I was like the escape from the normal home life now. So now I'm more of like a friend role and a confidant. To one of my kids came out to me the other day, and like, it's just like, now my role has changed. So I don't want you all to say like, oh, I can't be, you know, a family, I can't represent a family structure. You can. It just looks and feels a lot of different ways, and that relationship could continue to evolve.
Oh, like a cousin or something like that.
Right, exactly. And I have plenty of cousins who, you know, we may not talk all the time, or we may not talk about, you know, certain things that people feel are like the most important things, but those are some like the most influential people in my life still, you know? So I think it's just all about figuring out where you fit in that family structure.
Right.
So this book honestly has a lot of different things he comes up with. So I tried to pull something from all the chapters. So this one was a cognitive dialogue. And they're just kind of simple conversations between the teacher and the student with the goal of like co-creating what's going to happen in the class and ways to improve the classroom from the kids' point of view. So it's allowing them kind of to chime in on how you teach and how things function in the class, which I remember from Institute, TFA explained is like really important to them. And it's our way of empowering kids. On the next slide, I want to show you guys something that came up. I want to just make sure it works. From my students, they wanted to, we were doing multiplication. A kid was like, can we make up a rap? And I was like, is that something you guys all want to do? And they were like, yeah. So I gave them exactly 30 minutes, 15 minutes to make it up, and then 15 minutes to perfect it, and then we performed them. So I wanted to show you guys this, and then we're going to talk about cogenerative dialogues in your classrooms. Let's hopefully this works. It's really short.
Is it on your YouTube?
Mm-hmm.
You just might have to pull up the webpage.
I don't know what I just did.
You can click on the YouTube like sign on the video.
Like right here?
No, or say YouTube on the video.
Oh.
Yeah, you should, and then it should bring the webpage. Yeah.
I was really proud of them for this. Really cool.
2, 1.
So that's just something my students did after they requested of me like a way to learn it. Because I honestly, like the song I picked for them was a rap that came off of a YouTube video, but it was their idea that they got to make up their own raps. It's not something I thought about them doing at all because I can't rap and it was something I was gonna make up. So I let them come up with it all by themselves. And I just wanted to know how often, or if you guys have ever done a cogenerative dialogue in your own classrooms and what were the kind of outcomes of them.
Mine's short too. So we actually did a rap too for learning the gas laws. And so it gave them a chance to, of course, again, work with each other. And they came up with this really cool, like, clap and dance thing, like they just did. And I asked them if they wanted me to record it. They're like, yeah, sure. Like, can I show it to everybody? Yeah. So I actually used that video as like an example to show the rest of my class, like, hey, we're gonna come up with this thing together, and they absolutely loved it, and we had a great time. I know one class didn't get a chance to get to it that day, and so the next day I saw them. They're like, "Are we gonna be able to do that activity?" The other classes that they did, and it kind of also gives them that opportunity to, like, it gives them joy to know that I'm going to do this later on today, and it gives them something to look forward to.
Anybody else want to share?
My example of this, it's not very profound. I usually engaged in cogenerative dialogues when there was a problem, which probably isn't the best practice, but anytime that there was a fight in my classroom, there would be no more teaching, which to a lot of people, they assumed that meant like kids were always fighting to like get away from doing work, but that wasn't really what ended up happening. What ended up happening is that from then on, we weren't teaching, we were actually reflecting on what happened and creating action plans for how to avoid that from happening, next time. Also, there would be a section of our routine, I guess, for lack of better words, where students would apologize to each other and apologize to their class, because now they've not only hurt one another, but they've hurt and disrupted people in the classroom. So I think that that's my only example of that. I'm sure I could have done a lot better job of that while in the classroom still, but I definitely think that that was a great way to incorporate or just include what, you know, students thought they could do to make the classroom better, and not just it be like, oh, me talking to you and telling you now that this has happened, this is what we're going to do. It's more so like opening the floor and saying, this is a problem that involves y'all, so I want to involve y'all in the solution as well.
I really actually like that. I wish I had done that. Because the first year I started teaching, I remember I was having a fight, like a full blown on fist fights erupting in my room, like at least once every 2 weeks. And I mean, you know, I look back at it, I mean, yeah, the counselor shouldn't, you know, a lot of my classes, I had like over 90% IEP, and I had 30 at once, high school students who were just, I mean, they were ready to go. And I mean, it got to a point where it was like the administration was like, well, why even bother teaching them? Just keep the door shut and just stand out in the hallway, and that'll be fine, you know? And it's like, you know, and I literally had administrators, and they were like, oh, well, we have these extra kids just wandering in the hallway. We're going to put them in here because we know that, you know, they're already crazy. And I was just like, and I went, well, I mean, and the thing is, I ended up getting in a way better spot and everything, but I think what would really help me if I did something like that, where I was like, okay, let's sit down. I'm not teaching world history anymore. We're going to just, you know, we're not, you know, other than being like, I'm going to continue to try to teach through this crisis because I'm TFA, here I go, you know, rather than being like, okay, we're addressing this problem, and, you know, we can sit here and stare at each other all period, I don't mind. You know, we have to come up with a code here because this is not working. I can't have you tearing yourself apart. And I think that that's for probably in a high school setting, I feel that this would be extremely appropriate at. Because when I was reading it at first, I was kind of like thinking like group projects and stuff in the English classroom. And I was like, oh, you know, yeah, I could get them to do that, or like, you know, write down like raps and stuff. But I've tried that before and it didn't have that much success with it. But I guess it also just depends on the type, you know, the assortment of students you have and their sense of brazen or boldness, you know, they want to do in that regard.
And before we go to the next chapter, I do want to mention that the author suggests that the cogenerative dialogue starts with a small group of kids, not like mine, because mine started, what I said, one kid blurted out, can we make our own rap? And I was like, sure, but he suggests that you pull a small group, like maybe 4 kids or so, and you guys meet outside of classroom time and talk about the pros and cons of how you teach and what could be done differently that they would like to see. So maybe if you guys have 4 students who you're like, oh yeah, they could definitely help me out if they would like to do that, maybe doing something like that for a different approach instead of doing a whole classroom thing first. And then he says that those kids were kind of basically like undercover spies in the classroom because they went back and they didn't say, oh, we met with such and such about this. They would just go back and try to do those norms in the classroom and kind of pull out from their peers what they wanted to hear. They would just kind of bring it back to the teacher. And they were like the secret spies between everyone, the translators, honestly.
We had something kind of like this happen in, I guess, the classroom that I shared with one of my math co's, even though I'm history. It was more so behavior, like surrounding around behavior, but it ended up helping my content. We had a couple of kids that were like really rather squirrely when it came to like class time content. And so what we did was have a conversation with about 3 of them outside. Like, so how would you, I guess, in terms of like a spy or like a support person for one of your classmates that is like consistently off task. And so it started off with just like 3 of them. And then after that, everybody ended up pairing up with another person. Like, here's what I'm going to do to keep this person on task. Here's what I'm going to do to make sure this person doesn't, you know, call out in the middle of class and disrupt our classroom. And now they're like one of the most peaceful classes that I had. In the beginning, they were like one of my hardest classes, but everybody kind of has worked in a buddy system on how they're going to support their classmate or their teammate in keeping the class as calm and as efficient for everyone as possible. And it ended up helping all of us get to our content faster. It enabled us to have deeper and longer discussions because people were like, hey, you're off task, tap, tap, focus. Like, it was a lot easier for us to get our class done and to have more fun because we weren't really focused on behavior as teachers. Everybody was like self-correcting. And so it ended up helping out with that small conversation of like 3 or 4 in the
I think also I found a lot of this happening when we have an intervention group. So like the kids are allowed to read different articles, and then I like kind of quiz them on them. But so after I started doing that, I asked them what articles they'd want to read about, what topics, and it definitely wasn't like something I probably would have picked my own, like on myself. So it was able to like get them interested in the topics or get them interested in the articles we were reading. And I've seen a like dramatic shift in their interest and the ability or interest. They go right into the topics rather than just like drudging along whatever articles I would have probably picked. So.
The last shameless TFA plug I will put on this is if you're struggling with thinking of a way to incorporate generative dialogues in your classroom, student surveys are exactly that. So push your kids to fill in the extended response and tell you exactly what it is that they are liking or disliking in the classroom. And then I think the most important part of student surveys is your follow-up. So make sure that you're mentioning the things that you see written in your student surveys in class. Make sure if there's one student or two students who you see like an awkward trend, maybe they're putting ones and twos for a lot of stuff, you follow up with the class and say like, I know that there's a certain number of people, I know they're anonymous, but there's a certain number of people who don't believe this is true. Just like drop the fact that you paid attention to the surveys, and then you'll start to get a better student response.
Click it again. All right, so chapter 5 talks about the differences between teachers and students, and he explains that when the differences aren't addressed, that they multiply very quickly, and that effective teachers adjust how they teach in response to the differences. So in chapter 1, we talked about the cultural differences and classroom colonialism, so I feel like this chapter plays a lot on chapter 1. And I just wanted to know how any of you have ever adjusted your teaching methods in response to seeing a difference between you and your students.
So at least in math, the format that we use in math is like bell ringer, I teach something, you practice it, as a group together, and then you do independent practice. And I remember like it was very uncomfortable when I first started teaching my first year, and like in independent practice, like it absolutely never worked, and I was very uncomfortable having like them talking during it or whatever. So like I think it was through a student survey or something, and one student was like, well, why can't we just like work together on problems? And I was like, okay. And then I was like, oh, I don't know if we have the emotional maturity to do that without a fight breaking out. I don't know. And then this year it's worked a lot better, where I'm like, okay, like, you're pretty strong at math and you like mostly get it 80% of the time. So like, here, will you go over there for me? And like, maybe you can change up your partner next block, and I need you over here today. Okay, great. Oh, you're working alone today. Okay, great. Like, who do you want? Okay, great. Like, you cannot work with her. We're gonna like, and pairing them off during independent practice has really turned it around in my like math class this year compared to last year.
What I've done is, and how I developed this from last year's, I came in with like, well, I have this fancy world history master's degree. I'm coming in on lecture, so I have to say support like that, and that was not working. That was, even I had the notes, and then I remember we were, my TFA coach at the time was like, well, let's do fill-in notes, but then I was getting too scripted, and it was like the prep time was just getting longer because I couldn't just be like, here's the terms we're going through them, and when I moved into ELA midway through last year, where I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do instead. And my format is that I'm very hands-off on the entire lesson. I'm just like, okay, I provide all the documents, everything they need to do. And I see myself more as this person that comes in and says, okay, we're done with this portion. We need to now transition onto this. And there are notes, but I always keep it like down to like 6 or 7. And then I just focus on like tomorrow I'm going through juxtaposition, paradox, and motif, and other things like that. As the motif thing is where we haven't been doing motif yet, but focusing in on that, and then actually choosing like articles that I find interesting, like from a National Geographic, instead of just relying on like News ELA, which everyone's like that's the best thing ever. But like for me, the way I teach my English is like they need to be reading at this certain level, so let's be focused on this level. But you're working in groups together, so I have them all in like 6 groups of 4. before sometimes. And then I'm like, okay, you know, here's this very interesting article, and then I apply it to the literature component. And so it takes a little more homework and research on my part, but I found that the more I'm not lecturing the students directly, and it works, this is, I think, only works like in an ELA classroom, but the less I find that I'm lecturing them, the more that they're able to experience the content themselves and the more value they place in it.
I would like to push back a little bit about like it only applying to ELA, because I know for math last year and even this year, some days I spent a little bit more time lecturing, but even today we did a cut and paste and a partner activity with Dice Encounters, which I've never done before, but we spent basically 80% of class with groups or doing something fun. And my students did really well. I had a lot of 100% today, and I was really surprised by it. And I think now moving forward, I should do some days where I'm more hands-off so they can be more hands-on, and I like that now.
Yeah, and it's like the thing they were talking to me today about, because I always ask like the same like 5-6 questions every day, you know, about like tone, mood, when we're going through these articles. And then I was pairing it up with the test prep materials as well. And so it's like they were going through like, Mr. Hadwell, this is the easiest, these questions, these multiple choice questions aren't even like, they're easy. I was like, aha, you went through and you read, you already knew what I was going to ask. You already knew that I was going to be like, what's the mood, what's the tone, what's this? And this is an actual state test from like 2 years ago. I was like, aha, you knew that one. You already knew it. And that's why it's easy. And like, you know, the state, there was like a 30% pass rate on these questions, and you guys are scoring like 90 percentile. And it's because it's like, I don't know, conditioning them, but like, I'm like,
but I think this is a really important part, and I think something that actually disagrees with what the book says. And feel free if both of you disagree with what I'm about to say. But it sounds like both of you already have a very solid structure in mind for how you want your classes to run, and it's just like, okay, how can I like maybe tweak or motivate students here and there so they engage a bit better with this like very firm picture in my mind of like how I want things to run. And it seems like the book is pushing the point that you sort of need to crowdsource from students in order to create, whereas it's almost, for me, it's like, well, a lot of times students are confused about how they think they should be interacting or how they think they should be acting or what they think they should be doing. And if I can provide that very solid structure or idea first, I can get the stability and sort of interaction there. And then it's just a matter of, you know, finessing them into an existing thing.
And then kind of like you all been talking about, I tried incorporating group talk with my students. At first, I didn't really trust them because at 5-year-old, 4-year-old, they're like talking about anything, like playing.
Yeah.
And like you said, I had to teach them how to talk to their partner and discuss what we're talking about. So during reading time, I've noticed that they'll pair with certain friends, like they call it friends. They pair with certain friends in the classroom, and they actually work with them and teach them how to read, like read with their finger and break it up. And if it's a word that they don't know together, they'll go and blend it together. So I'm starting to try to hands off myself and try to let them teach each other, because it's starting to work.
Chapter 6 talked about cosmopolitanism, and it's the idea that human beings belong to a single community. And in the book, he talks about an example where a student was supposed to go home to go see her dad for the weekend, and she wasn't coming to class on Friday. And then on Friday, he sees her in class, and he was kind of concerned about her all day, kind of saying like, hey, you want to talk? Are you okay? And she was like, yeah, I'm fine. What do you mean? Class was great. And then finally, he was kind of like, what happened with your dad? And she was like, oh, I canceled on him because I wanted to come to school because I'm the lab resource like distributor. Who else was going to do it if I wasn't here? And it's like she had a very high sense of responsibility for her classroom. She's like, I need to be here because without me, they can't do it, basically. And I was wondering, like, how can we get our students to feel that way? Like, I have to be at school because I play this big role in my classroom. If I'm not there, everything's going to fall apart.
I don't like that. Oh, well, seeing as though I have the middle children, so sometimes some of these things are a little hard to do. But even in my classroom, I have one kid who's a repeater, so he was in my class last year, and so during learning strategies, he's the only kid that's in there that is a repeater.
So I don't know if it was our relationship with each other or just how he felt at that moment, but he is the leader. He has to do this. I'll be the one to open the door, Miss May. Or as soon as he walks in, he goes right to the table to grab the hand sanitizer. Like, no one else can do this. It's my job. So, and giving him the opportunity to do that, sometimes I feel like just makes him feel important because of the fact that I am only a kid in here that's about to be 13 years old. I pretty much have done everything. It was one class that he barely missed in order for him to stay there. So just giving them those opportunities and knowing that they feel that important really helps for them to be there. And even in the morning, feel kind of like, you got enough hand sanitizer? You know, I can refill the jar for you. No, you can go to class. You'll do that when you get here.
How do you do that without students feeling like favoritism, or maybe it's not a problem because they're older, but I know like with my younger kids, it turns into, well, why does she always get to do it? And you're like, it's her job.
Yeah, I think with them, a few of them kind of said it at first, but I do see them twice. So like this is the second time I see them. So if they don't get a chance to do it that day, they know that when they come to me for actual science class, that they get a chance to do it. So they've done a lot better with working with each other and letting so-and-so, whoever did it Monday, knows that I don't need to touch it Wednesday. Somebody else needs to do it.
In my classroom, I did a job application for my classroom jobs. The kids were supposed to like take it home, talk about like their skills, what would make them successful in that job, kind of like a real world job application. And then like all the kids submit it every quarter and get different positions based on their application. And that has really helped the situation in my classroom. So they're not fighting and like who gets to do this, who gets to do that. Like they all get their preset jobs, but then they all like applied for it, and that's why they got the job, is because like I give it to someone else that doesn't even know them and they pick based on their application. And I think that's like kind of helped like put the ownership on the kids a little bit, and that I'm not just like picking people every day.
So for time, we'll go ahead and go to chapter 7. Okay, so chapter 7 talks about when context is infused with instruction in a way that truly reflects where the students are from, a new challenge emerges. It says the teacher has to be more knowledgeable of the context than ever before. So this is kind of saying teaching the material that we're required to teach by state, but also infusing it with like the cultural background or the way the kids think we should be teaching. It requires us to know more about what we're supposed to be teaching. Like, do you guys think this is true? Have you had an experience like this where you're like, how can I teach them this in their way? And it became harder for you?
Well, I know in my classroom, 20th century American, it's an elective I'm teaching. It's a very strange mashup. I have 50% seniors, 50% freshmen in that one class. It's a very weird situation, but like I've noticed that the material, we were going over the Crucible, you know, and McCarthyism, and it was like we weren't getting it. I mean, we were getting it, we hated it. The entire class, I was like a dentist and they're doing root canals on them. You know, and I was like, okay, like what am I not doing right? You know, I was looking at all these different activities. Let's make posters, let's draw, let's do this. And I was like, we really don't care. And you know, and I was like, yeah, but you know, hasn't anyone ever told a vicious rumor? And they're like, yeah, I'd go pop them and then be done with it. You know, and I was like, well, okay. And so I was like, let's move along then to the Beat Generation and be focusing on, let's say, the music industry. And what I'm planning on doing in that section, I'm going to experiment, because there was a heated moment today in there between two students, and they got into a really weird fight about NBA Youngboy versus another rapper. Who was better? And I was like, I've used some of NBA Youngboy's lyrics and when I was teaching poetry, and that's how I always introduce poetry, because his producers do a pretty good job with the lyrics and stuff to make sure that they rhyme. And it meant I can teach rhyme scheme off of it, and we can get central idea, mood, tone, all of that. And what I'm planning on doing is let's compare, you know, rap that we know of today with NBA Youngboy with earlier with what was the music in the 1960s and stuff, the rock and roll as that was hitting. Of course, it's going to be culturally very goofy. I mean, comparing the Beatles to NBA nevertheless, keep it content-wise, but also have the students synced and have them reading, which is my end goal, at least because I'm treating that 20th century class like just like a reading class.
I would have never thought to do something like that because I know I don't listen to NBA Youngboy, and I would have been like, "Oh, I know who that is." Like, good for you guys. I would have never thought to actually try to look at his lyrics. It's like, "Oh, they rhyme. I can use that." That's really cool that you did that.
And I think this question has always frustrated me as a math teacher because it's like, of course, in English class, you can always talk about NBA Youngboy. And in math class, like, math is its own language, separate from everything. How would you ever? And, like, the stuff that I know I've seen from TFA is, like, look at these math teachers. They've incorporated statistics on, Black male incarceration. And it's like, yes, but if I run that in a lesson, we're going to need to shelf the math for 40 minutes and talk about the social issue. And I need you on the math. Like, I don't need you on the, like, we need to be on the math. And I think, there's an idea of, well, you need to make it culturally relevant, but sometimes making a lesson, especially in the context of math relevant, is just, we know our kids are often behind grade level, so meeting them where they are just means making it more accessible to them academically. And for math, in my class, what that's meant is like making the starter activity something visual, so everyone can kind of be like, well, I can look at this thing and I can like guess what's going to happen or like what's it doing, and I can like write a few sentences based off of what I think to like get most of the class going right off the bat, and then kind of be like, okay, now that you're all with me and where I'm trying to get you to go, now we can just listen to me talk about this related topic or lecture or whatever before we practice it. So I think, there's this pushback of like, well, you need to make it culturally relevant, but sometimes making it relevant means making it more academically accessible.
I know for me, like usually like the second or third day of some topic I'm doing in math, I always ask them, how can you use this in your life? And I just want to come up with like one way outside of school. And even though people don't always think about that as like culture, it's their culture. It's like, how could I use it in my life? And I'm like, you have to use it at some point, right? But you also teach higher math. It's a little different. Like I personally never used to provide like any theorem in my life. That way. So it's like different because I teach fractions in addition to subtraction, multiplying. It's a little easier, but I also have younger kids, so it's harder for them to think on that level. So maybe your older kids could think about these bigger concepts in the same way. We gotta go to the next slide. So that's the book so far. That's all we've read, but I want to see if anyone had anything else to say before we skedaddle out of here. All right, so next slide, and I'm going to copy and paste it into the chat box, is our exit form. Hopefully I know how to do this.
Should we do this?
Yes, those who are here as well, you can do it on your laptops. You can do it, I have my laptop. You can do it on this laptop as well. I'm going to try to stick this in the chat box. Oh, someone's been chatting in here. Yeah, I'm so sorry, Nathan.
That's okay. It was a while ago.
Okay, so you can click this link. This is how you're going to get credit for this session. And I'm going to just send this, whoever does the Google form, to Kwanzaa from here. And that's where you're going to get credit. And we have our next session on December 18th. Same time, same place. And inside the Google form, you can write whatever you want added to next session, or if something's missing or something you like that we did do that you want us to do again. But that's all I have for you guys. I'm going to stop the video. So good night, guys. I'm going to let people take the test Google form on here too. Thanks you guys for coming. Okay, stop share.
Thank you.
Pause or stop.